What does this shutdown mean for us? We'll talk about it tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
Now listen, if 2018 was any indication, all things could have changed by the time we taped this show at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. As you know, if you watch the show regularly, I mention it often because I want to be kind of credible with timelines and the like. And I think probably a dozen times at least during 2018, we were talking about something same day, and the circumstances had pivotally changed by the time you saw the show at 7:30 and or midnight. One can only hope that the government opened up between 1 o'clock in the afternoon and the time you're seeing the show. I don't think so. And I'm guessing that my guest, who returns for the first time in 2019, Timothy Edgar, our go-to security guy from Brown, the author of the book Beyond Snowden, probably doesn't think so either. To set up the conversation on this day when Nancy Pelosi was installed as the Speaker of the House, here's what the network brought us.
Could be a long time, or it could be quickly.
President Trump is willing to engage in a lengthy battle with Democrats as he digs in on his signature campaign promise.
It's too important a subject to walk away from.
But Democrats have refused to allocate any money for a border wall, let alone the $5.6 billion the president has demanded. A source familiar with a private meeting later held with congressional leaders in the Situation Room tells CBS News that when Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer pressed the president to reopen agencies unrelated to border security, Mr. Trump responded, "I would look foolish if I did that." Political leaders have offered few solutions, but plenty of political theater.
Trump said, "Let's make a deal." Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer said, "Go to hell."
The president used his over an hour-and-a-half televised cabinet meeting yesterday to tout his own accomplishments.
We got the greatest tax cuts ever.
And even played the sympathy card.
I was here on Christmas evening. I was all by myself in the White House.
Democrats aren't budging.
We're asking the president to open up government.
And are also using the shutdown as a political opportunity.
At our last meeting, the president said, "I am going to shut the government down." They are now feeling the heat.
This as national landmarks close down and federal workers go on without pay.
The longer it goes, obviously you have to prioritize certain things, feeding your family, the gas to get to work.
How long are you willing to keep the government shut down then in order to get?
As long as it takes. I think the people of the country think I'm right.
He's his own pollster. I feel a lot of empathy for the all alone at Christmas thing. I don't know. Maybe my guess did. Tim, did you?
No one likes to be alone at Christmas.
But it looked like he actually enjoyed it.
Yes, there's no reason he couldn't have gone to Mar-a-Lago. He's the one who decided to shut the government down. But you know, it's really a disruption. I've lived through some government shutdowns. When they're just a few days or so, it's just a giant waste of time, a big fire drill. When it lasts a longer time, you know, into weeks and stuff, it can get a lot more serious.
Has ramifications. Timothy Edgar has vast experience working with both Republican and Democratic administrations in Washington. The kids at Brown are lucky to have him as a teacher. You just had a whole leadership thing that you just attended.
That's right.
You were telling me about it.
That's right.
What was it?
So there's a bipartisan event called Renaissance Weekend in Charleston, South Carolina. People may have heard of Bill and Hillary Clinton going to it, but they also have many Republicans. Former governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford, was there. Great discussions about science and technology, about art and music. The idea is that we really need in our national conversation to be talking about more than just politics. I think we're yelling at each other on Twitter a lot. You know, we did a series of songs, and I actually sang in the chorus there.
No, you did not.
I did, and one of them was "Put Down Your Tech Device." That was the title of the song.
Written by you?
No, not me. Many other participants.
You're not going to give us a small version
I won't,
of this?
But just put down your tech device. Okay, that's about enough. And it was about, you know, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, it gives a distorted picture of reality. We need to step back and we need to enrich our life with many other ways of thinking about the world. And I think holidays are a good time to do that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this iPhone has screen time measurement, right?
Yeah.
I actually don't pay much attention to it. During the holidays, when I try to shut it down a little bit and stay off of it, I noticed that my screen time was down to only 3 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Well, there you go.
Right? I mean, yeah, it's a work device for me. You know, in the old days, I'm old enough now to be able to talk about uphill barefoot both ways, 4 feet of snow, when men were men and sheep were sheep, and all that kind of stuff, right? But the old days, you know, you'd walk in with newspapers under both arms because you needed to know what was going on. Now it's all in here, so it's an excuse, but at the same time, it is paralyzing.
There's wonderful things about it. I use it all the time, but you've got to figure out a way to disconnect and be with people around you and have real meaningful conversations that don't take 240 characters.
So getting back to the reality of the circumstances now, you're a security guy at your gut. What does the shutdown do to affect security really? No spin.
Right.
No spin.
So the term essential and non-essential is not politically correct. We say accepted and non-accepted. But so people who are really critical for that moment are required to work through the shutdown without pay. But as it gets longer and longer, then you start getting ramifications. The longer term stuff doesn't happen. You know, lots of critical planning things that are going on in agencies that are shut down won't be happening during the period of the shutdown, and it's the uncertainty more than anything else. You're actually not even allowed to work. You know, you're told by your agency's lawyers, because under law you can't check your email, you can't respond to phones. You know, if you try to call an agency that's shut down, they're going to get a message that says there's a shutdown, I don't know when I'm going to get back to you. Those things will pile up over time. Like I said, if it's just a few days, it's a giant waste of time, a giant waste of money. If it goes on for weeks,
but is it more administrative nightmare than it is the nation's security is at risk?
Well, you know, I wouldn't want to overstate that because we do have these essential or, you know, accepted employees that are working through the shutdown. But sure, you can't have this going on a regular basis. We've had more than one shutdown already in the past year, and now this is one that just there seems to be no urgency about ending it. That's the thing that bothers me.
But dig deep. You usually dig deep for me.
Yeah.
You're not digging deep here. Dig deep. Tell me what down the line could be the security hypothetical
Well,
if there is one, don't make it up. We don't want to make it up.
So because
I'll tell you, I think most people are pretty nonchalant about this whole
that's
thing.
That's
what
I'm
those
worried
not
about.
getting their checks.
So when you have major initiatives at places like the Department of Homeland Security, where it takes months of planning, this sets you back. It sets you back a month, a couple months. You know, it's not an immediate security impact, but it does down the road just make the government less functional. We already have enough government dysfunction as it is. I mean, you're dealing with, even before the shutdown happened, these agencies that weren't being funded, they're supposed to have been funded on October 1st, so they're already months behind that. They can't start new projects. They can't plan ahead. So whenever you hear people say, well, government's not working, it's not planning ahead, it's not thinking in the long run, that's not necessarily the fault of the employees when they're, you know, treated like footballs this way by the president and the Congress, being batted around in the way that they are. And that does have a security impact. So it's not just the shutdown, it's just the overall dysfunction of the government, of not funding agencies and letting them plan 1 year, 2 year, 5 years ahead, which is what they really want to be doing.
Right. All right. When we come back, we'll talk about the border security, which is the problem here, the political conversation or the security conversation. Which one is it? Stay with us. At the core of this entire situation is this argument over the wall. There's a part of me that wants to give the president a little bit of credit because I have been saying, mostly through the campaign and 17 and 18, that he's going to give this up. I still think he's going to give this up. I still think he's created kind of a ruse around whether or not there's actually a real wall to ever go up. And so I think he's the first one that'll cry chicken on this whole thing.
Well, it's become a sort of theological question about what is a wall.
Right.
I mean, we have
the definition of what is a wall?
We have a 2,000-mile border. About 700 miles of that already have some kind of barrier or fencing. Most of it low-level fencing designed to stop vehicles, not people. You could just walk right over it. And then a fair amount that's actually quite high, and that's a big fence or even a wall in some urban areas. And I don't think anyone disagrees with the idea that there might be a role for physical barriers along the border, or that the border can be a dangerous place, and that there are human smugglers, and there's, bad hombres, as the president might say, about there. The question is, should we be having a real conversation about border security and the broader issue of immigration, or should we be just fixated on this one possible barrier, which has become a theological issue for perhaps both sides, but certainly for President Trump.
Theological is an interesting word to use. In some ways, it's mythological.
Right.
Right. I'm not going to debate the terms.
Right. Well,
he's holding on, but then he'll move. Mm-hmm. He'll move slightly down to the term technology. He'll acquiesce, kind of offer a hint, whether it's strategic or just something that floated into his head that maybe doesn't have to be the monster wall. And we've seen the videos of the prototypes that are out there.
Right. Well, I think
I don't know where this ends, though.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of it is that for those who have very strong anti-immigrant sentiments, who have some of those biases, this becomes a symbol of doing something about, the broader changes in society, where, and I think that the president has lost a lot of credibility with people in the middle who might be sympathetic to using some types of walls, some sort of barriers, because of actions like, denying the right to apply for asylum, separating immigrant families. These are very cruel policies that have lost him ground among any kind of person of goodwill who might want to have a reasonable conversation with him about border security, because now they see the wall also as a mythological symbol of everything that they hate, in the same way that Trump and his supporters see it as somehow, the answer to all of our security problems.
We really have it dawns on me as we're having this conversation, we have a fixation with terms. We have a shorter attention span now, so we're on bumper stickers and headlines all the time. I used to argue a lot that healthcare in this country wouldn't have been such a political problem in the last few years if we hadn't labeled the Affordable Care Act Obamacare.
Right.
Right? And I was hoping that President Obama at one juncture would just say, if you stop calling it me, we can actually work on the constructive details on what will service everybody's needs. I wonder if there's any chance that we can substitute the word wall for something else that brings everybody to a place where it just results in security strategy.
I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, if you look at where they actually are, I mean, you've got the Democrats saying, what, $1.3 or $1.6 billion for additional border security, and Trump saying, no, it has to be $5 billion, and that's because of the wall. It would be easy to meet in the middle if the conversation was not about building a giant wall, but was about what are the things we could do with this money that might be good for border security, and most of them are not going to be about building physical structures. They're going to be about better intelligence, better use of technology, and reforming, some of our broken immigration systems.
And I'm not sure, by the way, $5.5 billion gets you the wall.
Doesn't. No,
it's supposed to be small, like $18 billion.
It's going to cost a lot more than that if you were going to do a full-blown wall across the entire. In fact, it's basically physically impossible in many areas.
The actual mind-blowing reality about this is that the president's holding on to a $5.5 billion number for a real wall that cannot be built for that number.
That's exactly right.
So he's holding on to a political victory and a mythological win.
In a more than $1 trillion federal budget, the difference of $3 billion or $4 billion is very little. So the notion that you would shut down the government over what is, okay, it's not nothing, but in the context of federal budget, this is a relatively small funding dispute that's been blown up because of rhetoric into a giant, mythological discussion about everything about who are we as Americans, and that's why you can't compromise. That's the problem. We can't compromise on big giant issues like that. We can compromise on little issues. That's how you can compromise. Is you say, well, let's agree to disagree about some of these huge mythological issues, and let's just talk about what are we going to spend $3 or $4 billion in border security on.
I don't know if the Democrats are playing this extremely well either. No money for the wall over our dead body. It seems to me that the way that you position yourselves, A, for constructive progress in the country, and B, politically, is to try to outsmart him and not sit there and just fight him. Fighting him fuels him. Outsmarting him renders him somewhat weaponless.
I think that's right. I mean, this is why I think your prediction that the government's not going to be reopened by tonight is very likely to come true, because there's going to have to be some climbing down from both positions. And anyone who's ever taken a seminar in negotiation will tell you that as soon as you get yourself up like this, you're setting yourself up where if you don't get everything, then you failed. And both sides have set themselves up so that they are positioning themselves. One person has to win and one person has to lose, and that's never the way a negotiation can successfully work.
I mean, they could double the number from 1.6 billion. Call it fence, wall, light. Give them something. Reach over and really put them in a place, rather than the "we won't budge." I just don't. I think that the people in the middle, which is most of America, they want that kind of thing. They don't want. They don't want. I don't think they're as worried about the shutdown yet, but they just don't want this consternation.
I think that's right.
And they want a solution for what seems to be a continuing problem. By the way, an overall immigration package is what we were allegedly trying to get in this country. We still can't get it. This doesn't seem like the way to get it done.
I mean, I write about in my book in 2001, before the towers fell. I was working on immigration reform with Senator Kennedy and then Republican senators trying to put together a compromise on that. And it's been, it's 2019, and 18 years later, almost 18 years later, and we're still talking about it. We still haven't made progress on an overall package for what are we going to do about immigration.
When we come back, I want to ask Tim what his thought is on how isolated the president really might be heading into the new year. Stay with us. So it's kind of fascinating. Mitt Romney decides to step out with an op-ed piece, and it's a 24-hour news cycle of holy cow, is this a setup? Then he pulls back from any notion that he'll run in 2020. And actually today he was pulling back a little bit from the, I think, the strength of his op-ed piece and calling on the president's character problems and all that kind of a thing. Now it's about, when we disagree, I'm going to disagree with him. Well, congratulations,
Right.
But it is a little bit of a sign that he's got enough political capital where he comes from now in his now old home, new home state, right?
Yeah.
That he can spend that and speak to a consciousness in the Republican Party that may still be there but is completely moot.
Well, I think the big problem that we've seen over the past 2 years is that writing op-eds or expressing concern about civility or decency doesn't work. You need to make... If the Republicans want to be a check on Trump and cause him to change his behavior, they're going to have to do something that they have to actually do something.
But they haven't done
and
that.
They've
already made a calculation that they're going to ride this horse as long as they have to or need to.
Well, and this is what was perhaps a little disheartening about Romney's sort of pulling back, is that Romney was in a great position, may still be in a great position to play that role. He's just got elected. He's got 6 years to go. Popular in Utah. Some of the people in Utah, very conservative people, but they don't like Trump's style as much as other Republicans do. So he could, if he wants to, play that role of being more independent and being more of a check.
All right, so I don't know if the base ever erodes. It just may never erode. I mean, it used to be I'd look at data on polls and the like, and if 35% felt something like, I usually look at 35% as the given, they don't get it crowd. Mm-hmm. It could be from any direction politically.
Right.
35% never bothered me when I was looking at a story ever, and now we're hyper-focused that 90% of the 35% think he's incredible, which means the Republican Party has been pared down to a core at this point. But will they ever worry about things like Mattis And how isolated do you think the president is right now?
I think he's more isolated than ever. He has not taken a midterm correction. When Obama got the shellacking in 2010, he didn't change a whole lot of policies, but he did at least acknowledge, okay, I understood that some people didn't like what I had to say, when that's also happened with Clinton or even with George W. Bush. Presidents typically, when they get, when they suffer a loss that's this substantial, this is a big loss. Huge number of voters that turned out, largest majority in decades, I believe, to flip the House. Those are things that should cause a president to say, I'm going to bring in some new people, I'm going to broaden my support a little bit, I'm going to have a different approach. He hasn't done any of those things. This shutdown would have been an opportunity for him to do that, and instead he's sort of doubling down as he always does.
Should we be worried? There's been a worried factor with his style the entire way, but is there a more tangible reason to be worried now?
Yes, I think we should be worried because I think the people who went into government thinking that they could moderate his behavior, people like Mattis, so Mattis was kind of the last of them, have now all left. Mattis resigning on a point of principle, and deciding.
No, he got fired.
Right, exactly. This attitude means Trump will surround himself with people who are yes men, and that's very bad for any leader, and certainly for a leader who is out of his depth. You need to have advisors who are willing to stand up and say no to you. He doesn't have that, and I think that's very worrying. Much more so than just the policy itself. We could debate about Syria and whether we should be there. I think there.
By the way, did you catch his historical view on why Russia invaded Afghanistan yesterday?
Yeah.
Just making it up. And everyone around him knows they're making it up, and they just watch him do it.
There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that named after these two psychologists. They've studied leadership, and they've shown that when you reach a certain level of incompetence, you don't realize that you're incompetent because you're too incompetent to know how incompetent you are. It's a very real thing, and it happens. Somebody who gets up there and says, I could be a general, I can tell you right now, I couldn't be a general.
I think you're way too tough on yourself.
I think, I haven't served in the military. I don't know what that is. That's a lot of work. And somebody who says things like that is somebody that we need to get very worried about.
All right. This Democratic impeachment thing, we only have 15 seconds. I think they're playing their cards wrong. Let the investigation play it out. What do you think?
I think absolutely.
Progressives want to, they're going to put it in today and blah blah blah.
I think there's first of all, just politically, let's be clear about this. 2/3 of the Senate isn't happening.
Right.
So
why waste that capital?
Why waste that capital? If you feel you have some kind of duty to bring it forward,
unless the investigation bears out
that could change things. Yeah. And I think that specific new facts may change minds. Perhaps Mitt Romney and others would come around. But if it's not there, it's not there.
Happy New Year, pal. Thank you.
Great.
Beyond Snowden's the book. Make sure you get it. Right back. We've got to look up that Dunning-Kruger effect. You probably thought to yourself, oh, I know a few of those, right? One that I know does not fit that category is the leader of the Warwick Police Department, who has announced his retirement. Colonel Stephen McCartney will join us tomorrow. I'm really excited about that broadcast, and so make a note, an appointment for that. In the meantime, I'll see you tomorrow at 3 until 6 on the radio on WPRO. Thanks for tuning in.